Hello everyone. I'm updating now that I finally have the opportunity. For those who haven't read my previous post outlining how this all started, see it right there. Now, as I alluded to in my prior comment I made on that post while I was sitting at the police station awaiting questioning, I was in fact taken in for disturbing the peace or some such nonsense upon my return to the neighborhood. During questioning, I told them much of what has been going on, though I deemed it prudent to not quite focus on my primary theory of supernatural causes, and instead just lay out what I knew and didn't know about suggesting the possibility of some elaborate prank by some unknown party. This wasn't as easy as it sounds, as it was hard to explain the weirder things through this lens, especially since they had received statements from a couple of our neighbors outlining what they'd observed of the situation over the past couple weeks. Apparently, fewer and fewer of them find the prankster's theory believable. At one point, I finally lost my patience and blurted out something along the lines of, well, then maybe they're real gnomes, along with a few other possible supernatural theories I had heard from many of you. By the way, to clarify, I was and remain very thankful to you all for those insightful hypotheses, even if the police didn't quite see them as much. Anyway, they deemed a psychiatric evaluation necessary and I was taken to the nearby hospital for a couple of days. After appearing surprisingly lucid throughout my stay, as I happened to hear one of the doctors say, and being as forthcoming and cooperative as possible, I was eventually deemed of sound mind and let back out to my own devices upon agreeing to and signing a promise to appear in court for the incident. I think the medical professionals I dealt with seemed to be more open to the prank theory and viewed my supernatural musings as the confused ideas of a poor, nerve-wracked and superstitious old man struggling to make sense of a situation he couldn't understand, rather than the full delusions of a raving lunatic. Nothing that would suggest any clear psychological issues or make me a real danger to the public, I suppose. When I arrived home, the gnomes and their various sinister companions awaited me, stationary, staring at me as I drove up. I wasn't sure whether to be concerned or relieved at how little they'd changed since I left. Most of the lawn spawn, as I've decided to use to refer to them collectively, even appeared to be stationed in the same locations. Some were shifted or transported to other parts of the yard, of course, but none in any meaningful pattern that I could discern. Regardless, I slowly and warily made my way to my front door, opened it, and immediately noticed two alarming developments. First is the gnomes had apparently continued multiplying, and really made themselves at home, so to speak. They obviously weren't relegating themselves to the outdoors anymore. Loose objects were strewn across the floor, and various gnomes were distributed throughout my living room, on furniture, tables, random spots on the ground. The one was even hanging from the ceiling fan and had the other non-sinister seeming smile of any of the group. Another had taken the place of a table lamp, though he apparently decided to keep the lampshade for himself, as it was now placed around the top of his pointy hat, covering the top half of his face. The other, more alarming thing I noticed was Lucy. She was standing in the room looking up at a particularly grumpy-looking gnome nestled on top of my bookshelf, before jumping when she noticed me entering the house. Our ensuing conversation basically went like this. "Oh, hey, you're not in jail, that's good," she greeted me. "What? Lucy, what are you doing here?" I asked. "After that gnome fell or jumped on me or whatever, I was really scared for a really long time, like a whole day. That the gnomes were going to come over and attack me again, especially after I killed one of their own. But nothing happened. So I decided to start investigating. Sorry, I thought you were losing your mind at first, by the way." I sighed. I responded that it was okay, and then asked how she got into my house. "Oh, the door was unlocked. Don't know if that was you or the gnomes. When I came in, these guys had already taken over by the looks of it," Lucy responded in a noticeably unfazed tone. "Your parents know you're here?" I asked next. "Of course not," she remarked in a similarly unworried tone. "They think I'm just riding my bike around as usual. I didn't lie to them." She broke in, as I must have looked like I was about to admonish her, and I was. "I made sure to ride my bike here instead of walking, so I wasn't being a liar if I didn't have to. Anyway, let me tell you what I found so far," she exclaimed. I didn't stop her. Decided to hold on to my questions and admonishments for now, since I did genuinely want to know what she discovered in her admittedly ill-advised investigation. "First thing is, I think the gnomes are in charge. Like, I bet they're behind the other stuff, like the other lawn decorations and the death lake, you know? The gnomes are the only ones that have come inside the house, for example. Also, they don't move when anyone's looking at them. Not even sure they can. When I got attacked, it was from behind. And when I turned to see, he suddenly stopped moving, and I was able to just pick him up and throw him. Since I came here, I've seen them in different places, but never seen them actually move to those places. For safety, though, I've been holding this in front of me as I walk around, she said as she held up a handheld mirror. She really is a clever girl. Anyway, yeah, she continued. They seem to have different jobs, kind of like the ants I've been learning about in science class. Hard to figure out much so far, since I can't watch them while they're doing anything, but the ones outside seem to be like guards. Most of the ones in here are probably workers or some sort, and a few seem to be helpers to the queen. Queen? Oh yeah, maybe I should say king, but I like my art comparison better, so I'm gonna stick with queen. Comparison, I corrected, but she ignored me and went on. Besides, for all we know, some of these guys could be girls. Maybe girl gnomes have beards too. Here, follow me, I'll show you, she said as she walked towards the bedroom. With a sense of dread, I followed her to my bedroom, only to see the bed had been converted into some sort of pillow and blanket fort-looking structure, with a small love seat from my living room placed right in the middle of the bed, adorned with sheets, cloths, and scattered jewelry from my departed wife. Neatly lining the top were a series of bird and squirrel skulls. I briefly wondered how the gnomes had managed to move all this, especially the love seat, before I noticed a series of makeshift rope pulleys that had been installed into the walls and ceiling. A makeshift platform made of my antique dining room table, its cylindrical legs chopped off and placed underneath for that apparent use as rolling logs. On the bizarre throne of fabric and furniture sat an admittedly regal-looking gnome, somewhat larger and more polished-looking than the others. It barely even looked undersized for the chair. As Lucy had alluded to, several gnomes were stationed around the queen like attendants. This ruler of the gnome colony appeared to glare piously toward us in the doorway with a dark and menacing expression on its face, after staring dumbfounded at what had become of what used to be my bedroom. I snapped out of my stupor and turned to the over-curious, under-cautious child next to me. Okay, Lucy, you should not be here. This looks dangerous, even if they can't move while being observed. Go home right now. Lucy opened her mouth as if to protest, but then, to my surprise, she just sighed as if she'd been expecting this. All right, Mr. Eugene, but you have to keep me updated on what happens. That reminds me, see this? She said as she pulled out a walkie-talkie. My parents really don't want me talking to you much anymore, so I borrowed these from my friend Sarah. I tried to put on my best solemn and wise grandfather demeanor, and instead just said, Lucy, do you understand how suspicious it would look if your parents or anyone else discovered you secretly communicating with the old man of questionable sanity that was arrested on your doorstep days before? We could both be in a lot of trouble, mainly me. I thought, but didn't say. Don't worry. I'll only use it with either my parents aren't home or I'm outside. I checked the ranges, though, and you're going to want to keep it to the side of the house, close to mine. Unfortunately, that's the side, obviously. But I'm sure that you'll get used to them, she said, gesturing to the inexplicable collection of garden gnomes that had made a throne room where I sleep. She was already walking towards the front door, even though she hadn't actually given me one. I told her that I couldn't accept one of her walkie-talkies, only for her to tell me which drawer she'd left mine in as she walked out of the house and closed the door. Honestly, after that, I just stood there for a short while, taking in the situation and wondering what I was going to do. Then I realized I'd forgotten something important to ask Lucy, checking to make sure her parents weren't home. Seeing only the car of the older cousin, who often babysat, I said some regretfully vulgar words to myself, grabbed the walkie-talkie from the drawer that Lucy had mentioned, and turned on the device and called Lucy. Well, 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 she said with a dramatic triumph, a child feels when she feels smarter than an adult. Thankfully, she didn't stretch it out too long. So soon, Mr. Eugene. Alright, what's up? I forgot to ask. Did anything happen with the baskets the other neighbors got? I hadn't been able to find much out from the police. I did mention it when recounting what Lucy told me, but was afraid to inquire too far since I didn't want them to think that I had tried to poison my neighbors or something. No one ever mentioned them again to me, so I assumed nothing especially horrible had happened, but I wanted to be sure. Lucy answered. Oh, those? Yeah, I don't think most people even took up or kept theirs, especially after your episode, as Daddy calls it. If they were anything like our basket, the vegetables smelled kind of rotten. I actually took in ours to use them for a prank on my cousin. I think I saw the Harlans throw theirs in the trash outside. Maybe everyone else did too. I could hope that she was right. Still didn't understand how the gnomes and their tools and schemes really worked, but the gnomes that attacked Lucy didn't do so until she brought the basket inside to go through. Who knows? Maybe that gnome was just a one-off thing. So I thanked Lucy, cut off the conversation, still not wanting to use the walkie-talkie any more than necessary. As I turned to put the device back in the drawer, I thought better of it once seeing that most of the gnomes in the room had turned towards me when I wasn't facing them, otherwise hadn't moved. I decided it was probably better not to leave it there and placed it in my pocket. At this point, I started trying many of you all suggested fixes from the comments and messages that resulted from my prior post. I scattered horseshoes and certain crystals around the house. I burned some sage, incense, and other such herbs suggested to me, and I salted the doorways and the koi pond outside. At this point, the koi pond had grown, as had the hagfish-type creatures inside. Weird, unidentifiable white crustaceans also flitted around the edges. The nearest tree had deformed into a leafless, gnarled mass that leaned over the pond. It's covered with those wailing wind chimes. A little windmill had also popped up next to the pond, but the blades visibly had blood on the edges. I elected not to investigate that particular development much closely. I walked over to my garden, though it was clearly their garden now. None of the plants looked remotely similar to when I'd grown them. The leaves had mostly turned a sickly teal or grayish purple, and leaves were chaotic shapes. The tomatoes were actually even brighter red than before, but apparently fleshier and seemed to faintly beat like a heart. I wondered if the gift baskets had contained vegetables more like these. I poured salt over the plants and surrounding earth, then made my way back to the front door. It was locked. Luckily, I had a key, and it seemed the gnomes and other lawn spawns did not yet wield the power of a locksmith, so I easily opened the door. As I entered, I noticed a new fixture in my living room, a note with the message, "Not welcome," crudely written, and the note pinned to the wall with a large kitchen knife. Every gnome in the room now faced the front door with a scowl on their face. I could see that the salt, horseshoes, and so on had not immediately deterred the invaders. I decided not to push my luck further and heeded their warning, at least temporarily. It looked like I really was going to have to call the professionals. After briefly telling Lucy through the walkie-talkie that I was leaving again and making her promise absolutely not to investigate the house while I was gone, and tossing out the 20 or so plastic flamingos that just randomly appeared inside my car at some point during all this, I drove to a hotel. I decided on a nicer one this time, closer to my house in case I needed to go back on short notice for any reason. And then I sat down and perused the internet for various religious and supernatural professionals that might be willing to help with my situation. I wanted to cover as much possible ground as possible. So I've already reached out to priests, priestesses of various religions, a psychic or two, even a ghost hunter in my area. I'm even thinking that I might arrange for all of them to come at the same time, though I could use some guidance on whether that's a good idea or not, as well as if there's any kind of professional worth contacting. Either way, I want this handled as soon as feasibly possible because I'm afraid of the increasing spread and power. Especially since, as I was leaving the neighborhood this time, I noticed something. A new pair of garden gnomes in the Joneses' yard, clearly styled from the same set. I hope it's not too late for me or them, but I get the feeling that this may all be over sooner rather than later, one way or another. Best wishes, Eugene. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. I really appreciate it, and anytime you guys give me a subscribe or a follow or a like or a comment or literally just a watch, I can't thank you enough for it because you're the reason I keep making episodes and you guys are the reason that I love horror as much as I do. We're in the middle of summer, and I'm from Texas, which means that it's a great time for iced tea. And you know who makes iced tea? My wife. My wife sells tea. My wife sells tea on Etsy.com/shop/ivory-monocle-tea. And if you want to get the MrCreepyPasta special, you can order a dark and stormy night and specifically request a dabbing sticker that you only get if you ask for it. And as always, I want to give a very special thanks to all of my patrons at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, because you guys are the reasons I get to keep my lights on in the house and get wonderful little treats for my cats and everything like that. And also the reason why we keep getting special custom series just for the channel. So a special thanks to Jacob Shaffer, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Bryon Arce, Ken Lando Higuchi, Bobby Karman, Tristain Pelton, Chase Burnett, Bardo Hawk 764, TheBananaMafia 1, Melancholy Corpse, Hollow Zero, Ferb, Harley, Billy Morrow, Birch, Sashi Sazaku, Kayden the Spooky Boy, My Body Sounds Like Rice AshWood, Lord of the Weebs, Jay, Feyelocket, Miss Xandra, MrUnsettlingSpaghetti, Eurogore, Suji Campbell, Marco Takes Dabs 420, Stricken, Ozarine Fox, Robert White, Andres Garcia, Snails Brennan, Legit Quad Feed, James Bruce, Chris Lovins, Freddy Krueger, Tynan, Justin Johnson, Michael Scarborough, Infernal One, James Lowe, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Jordan Nels, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Someone You Love, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Nina Smith, Nico Kayo, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Trace Miles, Corey Kenshin, and Peaceful Buddha. That's right, guys, at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, you could join this amazing list of people's names I mispronounce and the list of Patreons down there in the description. But of course, none of that is ever required. I just appreciate you guys subscribing and watching and honestly being here. So, to all of you, sweet dreams.